looking new cards. It is, clearly a very powerful late game card in the right set of circumstances. I think that the card that currently exists that's the easiest to compare Chromemaggus to is Kel'Thuzad. Not only because they have similar like body for the cost, it's a 6/8 minion, but they both provide like incremental increasing value as the game goes on if they remain in play. The difference with Kel'Thuzad and Chromemaggus is that with Kel'Thuzad you construct a board that you then use your tools to attack into your opponent's guys to immediately get value and sort of lock them out of being able to interact with your stuff until they can actually kill Kel'Thuzad. Whereas with Chromemaggus, just the longer Chromemaggus survives, the more value that you create by doubling each of your draw steps. I think that if a deck's looking to abuse Chromemaggus, what they're going to want is cards that allow you to draw cards immediately. So you're not just waiting to draw your cards on your turn. Like cards like Loot Hoarder, is obviously a card that's pretty powerful with Chromemaggus because you play Chromemaggus, attack your Loot Hoarder in, draw an extra card. I don't know that's, I doubt that a Chromemaggus Loot Hoarder deck is necessarily going to be, exactly how you want to build it. Or you look at Paladin. We're going to see a couple of cards, the new Paladin cards that actually work quite well with Chromemaggus. There's the Dragon Consort that reduces the cost of the next dragon you play, and then also the what's it called? I don't know. Basically the card draw spell that can get discounted if minions have died this turn, and that sort of thing. It's like, okay, well, can you create a board that you play your Dragon Consort to discount your Chromemaggus, you attack some guys in, you play the Chromemaggus, you play the discount card draw card, and suddenly you've drawn 4 cards immediately and gotten a ton of value off of Chromemaggus right away. Chromemaggus with Powered Shield, for instance, is very powerful because you can generate a draw immediately. So I think that the decks that are going to want to use Chromemaggus, are going to get the best use out of it, are going to be decks that can utilize its card draw effect right away and not have to just wait a turn for it. Otherwise, it's like, okay, well, how is Chromemaggus better than, say, Ysera? I think that when you're looking at sort of late game minions, I think the sort of bar currently is Ysera. How much better is this card than Ysera at winning a long attrition game? The fact that Chromemaggus is a 6/8 as opposed to a 4/12, it does mean that it is better able to actually fight for the board. It comes down to turn early than Ysera. You can play it and use a hero power or play a 2-cost spell in the same turn. Those are all a pretty big deal. So I think that this is a card that definitely has a lot of potential and is certainly one that I will be looking at possibly including in a lot of decks when I'm initially building with Blackrock Mountain. So let's take a look at another card. Go down the line here to, what do we have next? Demonwrath. All right, Demonwrath, this is a pretty cool card too. We've seen this same sort of effect with Fell Cannon already, and everyone needs to spam Fell Cannon faces in the chat. But the ability to have one-sided or at least selective damage that you can develop a board and have effects that are able to clear out your opponent's board and still maintain your. It's very powerful, and the demon luck decks that we've seen so far are already actually quite strong. A lot of them do include a lot of non-demon minions, so some of those will die to Demonwrath regardless. But some of those are things like Nerubian Egg, where you're actually totally happy to Demonwrath that away. Like if you're playing against, say, a Hunter deck, and your turn 2 is Nerubian Egg, and they spew a bunch of stuff into the board, and then you just Demonwrath, and you kill a bunch of their minions and trigger your Nerubian Egg. That's a really, really powerful effect, and I think that Demonwrath is a card that we're gonna see a reasonable amount of, see more sort of demon theme decks, demon tribal decks, come out of this because this is a really, really really powerful effect. The ability to kill, for instance, like Muster for Battle. Having to Hellfire away your own board in order to deal with a Paladin casting Muster for Battle is really, really not very effective when you're trying to actually develop. We've basically seen Warlock decks build as, sort of control style decks because, you need either like just all-out aggressive decks like Zoo or control style decks like Demon Lock and Handlock because so many of the tools that they have are either symmetrical like Hellfire or, expensive to build to. And this is a cheap asymmetrical effect. You can use this to wipe out your opponent's board while maintaining your own, or triggering your death rattles and stuff, like I said. So I think that I don't think this is the sort of card that's going to replace Hellfire. I think this is a card that creates decks that are different than those that want to include Hellfire. And frankly, the cards that are the most exciting to me are the cards that don't necessarily just slot into existing decks. They're cards that can allow for new decks to be created, and I think this is one of them. All right, let's keep going down the line to Dragon Consort. So this card is great. This is one of the most exciting cards to me in the entire, that has been revealed so far. I mentioned when I was doing my review of Dragon's Breath that the fact that we had seen both Flamewaker and Dragon's Breath out of Mage. So, we knew there were 2 class cards, and we saw both of them being cards that had nothing to do with dragons. And I was a little disappointed because I was hoping that we would see class-specific dragon-related cards, not necessarily class-specific dragons, but cards that were class-specific that were related to dragons. So, we have sort of similar kind of thing that we've seen with mechs, which is that each class wants to build a dragon deck in a different way, because they're trying to lean on particular synergies that are specific to their class. And while we actually didn't see it in most of the classes, we do see it here in Paladin, and I think this is probably the most exciting and powerful dragon-related effect that we've seen so far. Cost reduction effects are typically just from a systemic perspective one of the most powerful and dangerous things in any kind of trading card game. If you look at cost reduction effects historically, whether in Hearthstone or in Magic or any other game, they are among the most powerful sorts of effects that can exist. And this is a particularly powerful kind of cost reduction effect because it enables you to play extremely powerful late game minions much earlier than you otherwise would. Unlike something like Unstable Portal, which does give you a discount on a minion, this is something you can plan for and build around. So you can play Dragon Consort turn 5, and then on turn 6 you can play an 8-cost dragon. You can play Chromemaggus on turn 6. And like I was saying before, with the Chromemaggus sort of combo potential, if you have you have a bunch of minions for muster for battle, or just a bunch of minions kind of hanging out, you can play, like the Chromemaggus and then combo into it with other stuff because you were able to play it early, or you can play it on say turn 8, but still have 2 mana left over to do something with that effect. You can play any of the 9-mana dragons like Ysera or Alexstrasza or whatever on turn 7. Those are all huge effects. And even if you're not playing like a huge minion early, you're still getting a significant discount in the ability to play another thing and spend more mana on the same turn. And that's just absolutely huge. So, the body here is a 5/5 for 5. That's, that's a totally reasonable body. It's not, not incredible, but, we've seen Lotheb be a card that has seen play across all different kinds of decks at a 5/5 for 5. It's a totally, totally fine body, contests Sludge Belcher, trades with Ancient of Lore and things like that. It's a super, this is a super powerful effect on a totally reasonable body, and it's not even a legendary. So if you're building a Paladin deck, a Paladin Dragon deck, you can plan for the fact that a reasonable amount of the time you will actually have the ability to play a dragon discounted at sort of the middle turns of the game, because you can realistically anticipate that you'll be able to draw a Dragon Consort a certain percentage of the time by that point. So this is one of the most powerful cards, I think, in the entire set, and one of the cards that I'm certainly most excited to build around. All right, next we have Druid of the Flame. Now this is not a super exciting card to me. This is either a 5/2 or a 2/5. And while these are both beasts, we were told that these were like a flame, what is it, flame cat and flame hawk or something. I'm not really, neither of these is a particularly good deal. I'm not interested in getting a slightly better Magma Rager, and I'm not all that interested in getting a, slightly discounted, 2/5 or whatever. Neither of these is really has the stats that I think are something that I'm particularly excited about. Having the modularity, having the flexibility of the choose one effect, particularly given that it's a Druid choose one, so it can't be silenced. It's different than other sort of, okay, well this guy, buffing a guy. The fact that the Druid effect is a transformation means that, it's a little bit different. It does help enable the Druid of the Fang deck, because it is a beast, and it's a relatively cheap, potentially stable Druid beast. A 2/5 is not really going to be easily killed by a lot of opponents as a 3-cost, and will likely be able to curve you into your Druid of the Fang. But Druid of the Fang just isn't really a card that I think is particularly exciting to build around in a world where everyone is playing Big Game Hunter. So I think that this is, in a world where Big Game Hunter didn't exist, I could be excited about this card. But because Big Game Hunter exists, and I really only see this as being exciting as a possible enabler for Druid of the Fang, I'm just not really particularly excited about Druid of the Flame. All right, next we have Emperor Thaurissan. This is really low quality. Let me make it a better quality thing. Let me get a better quality Emperor Thaurissan. Hold on. Haha, higher quality. All right, Emperor Thaurissan. So this is one of the scariest cards in the new set to me. One of the things that I've actually been recently thinking about and been planning on writing about is the difficulty in interacting with a lot of the sort of things that a lot of decks can do. For instance, one of the most powerful and popular decks right now is the Oil Rogue decks, which are largely based around late game combinations of spells, and that's it. You know, they're a combination of your spells and your hero powers, and incidentally having anything in play, or drawing your South Sea deckhand to charge and just blow your opponent up. And the inability to actually interact with spells outside of delaying them via Loatheb, or just killing your opponent, those are basically the ways you can interact with spells currently in Hearthstone. Is that you can either kill your opponent, or you can Loatheb them. There's just nothing else. There's no way to stop your opponent from playing a spell other than like Counter Spell, which is extremely inefficient, and it's extremely limited to a particular class. So Emperor Thaurissan enables a lot of really powerful potential combos off of his Battlecry ability. Obviously, it's very situational. You have to have all the particular elements in your hand in order to enable them with Emperor Thaurissan. But you can play Emperor Thaurissan and then you can Force Roar your opponent on turn 7. You can, Innervate, Force Double Roar your opponent also on turn 7 after playing Emperor Thaurissan. And, yes, you had to have played Emperor Thaurissan, but he's giving you a reasonable body. A 5/5 for 6 is not great. It's you are clearly paying up front for the effect that you're getting later. But it's also, this doesn't reduce them to a minimum of 1. This reduces them to potentially 0. We saw this on stream. We saw Lightning Bolt getting reduced to 0 mana. I mean, you can imagine Emperor Thaurissan into, like, Malagos blow you up with 1,000,000 burn spells. And some of these are, like, that actually is kind of cool to me. Like, the fact that it enables the possibility of reaching outside of the limits of mana that normally exists in Hearthstone. I actually think that the 10 mana limit is something that causes some design constraints as far as, like, how cool you can actually make cards in Hearthstone. So like Deathwing is the only 10 mana card in Hearthstone, and you can't really make cards that are 11 or 12 mana because there's no way to ever cast them. So there's sort of a limit on like how big the biggest badass thing in the game can ever be, and how big of a possible like turn you can have outside of having mana reduction things like Emperor Thaurissan or Prep or whatever. And I think that it's really cool that a card like this can exist. I also think it's really scary because, like I said, that as far as spells are concerned, there are so few ways for your opponent to be able to interact once you have just cost reduction like this in like a Miracle Rogue style deck. Obviously, you get to the point where you play Emperor. You have to get to the point where you play Emperor and then you go off by playing the other cards. But this is the sort of thing that I think that potentially represents design constraints moving forward because okay, well, how can all these things potentially interact if they're also reduced cost? So I don't know. It's a really cool card. It's a really scary card. And I think from mostly what I've been talking about is actually not necessarily related to Emperor Thaurissan, but more related to the lack of the ability to interact with things like what Emperor Thaurissan feels like he enables, which is spell-based combos. And I'm definitely interested in seeing the sort of impact that he has on the metagame and the kind of decks that he enables, and that otherwise wouldn't be possible. But I'm also a little leery of seeing what all he can make happen. All right, so next, going down the line, Fireguard Destroyer. This is an awesome card. This is the sort of card that I think is, it's very powerful, and it's the sort of card that I feel like Shaman really needs. Aggressive Shaman decks haven't had great tools. I was hopeful for Dunmal Shaman when Goblins vs. Gnomes was released, but the 4 health on Dunmal Shaman basically doomed him to being, you know, no more than a, you know, an arena card or a card that that, you know, you are incredibly mad that your opponent got off of piloted Sky Golem. Fireguard Destroyer, you know, even at its worst, you know, even at its absolute worst, is a 4/6 for 4, and that's a pretty powerful card. You know, you compare that to, say, Hungry Dragon, which is a 5/6 for 4 with a drawback. This obviously is a drawback as well with Overload, but one of the things that Fireguard Destroyer is doing for Shaman is it is offering a on-curve way for Unbound Elemental to potentially be powerful. Unbound Elemental was a card that was pretty powerful in the early days of Hearthstone as far as the Shaman class was concerned, but kind of got outclassed by the other things that, you know, were introduced in Goblins vs. Gnomes and Naxxramas. You know, sort of fell behind the Death Rattle synergies and the mechs and things like that, and in part because there wasn't necessarily great support for it. The only real support were things like Feral Spirits, you know, Doomhammer, and Burn Spells, none of which were particularly good at contesting the sort of boards that people were creating with the sort of mech synergies and things like that. Fireguard Destroyer, though, this is just a really big, efficient minion. You know, 4 costs for 6 health to begin with is really powerful. And, you know, I am a little bit hesitant to be super excited about any card that has so much inherent randomness in it. In particular, one of my concerns about Hearthstone as a competitive game isn't that there's an element of randomness in it. It's a card game. Of course there's randomness in it. But there are lots of cards like Fireguard Destroyer that have explicit randomness in them. Fireguard Destroyer I actually think is a kind of low grade randomness, because it's just, this card is marginally better and it still is as easy to kill. It's not like it's, you know, a like XX like random possible like health as well. It'll always be just as easy to kill a Fireguard Destroyer no matter what, which is great. The fact that like cards like Piloted Shredder is currently one of my least favorite cards because, you know, you and your opponent can have a Piloted Shredder, each have a Piloted Shredder, and they fight, and what comes out of them can determine the game quite easily, and that's pretty frustrating. But Fireguard Destroyer is a little more palatable kind of randomness because, you know, yeah, maybe it can be incrementally better that your you know, Fireguard Destroyer is a 5/6 versus a 6/6, and sometimes you actually don't want it to be a 7/6, so it can't be big game huntered. So there's some interesting stuff going on there, but fundamentally I think this is a reasonable kind of random card that's different in terms of, you know, the way that it impacts your sort of experience of the game, compared to something like Piloted Shredder, for instance. Because when, you know, your opponent gets Millhouse and you get Captain's Parrot, it's just like, well, that was game deciding. Whether Fireguard Destroyer is, you know, a 4/6 or a 5/6 isn't necessarily going to be as big a deal. It can obviously be important, but it's also not as explicit and in your face when, you know, it goes horribly wrong. But anyway, this card I definitely think is one that will enable more aggressive Shaman decks, because that's something that hasn't really existed other than the really aggressive mech Shaman decks. Like the Overload based Unbound Elemental Shaman decks really want something like Fireguard Destroyer, and I'm really happy that it exists, because, you know, I was hoping Dunmal Shaman would be that, because I wanted to play Unbound Elemental because I have these sweet looking gold ones. But you know, I'm gonna have to wait until Blackrock Mountain and we get this guy. All right, next we have, where are we? Gang Up. So this is a weird card. Gang Up is a card that basically it has absolutely no impact on the board. That's weird. You know, to be spending mana on something that does nothing to impact the board, you know, whatsoever. On the other hand, this is a card that if a game goes long, can extremely increase the overall quality of your deck, or allow you access to a particular sort of effect far more times than you usually get it. My inclination is that this isn't going to be a particularly popular competitive card, but it does offer a pretty interesting effect for something like Fatigue Rogue. Being able to triple up on additional copies of Cold Light Oracle is really powerful for a deck that's looking to actually burn out your opponent's deck. But otherwise, you know, other than games that go really deep into Fatigue or really deep into your deck, and the relative card quality or relative density of particular sorts of effects matters, then this is just not the sort of card that's ever going to matter. You know, when you gang up, if you like, you know, just gang up a Piloted Shredder, it's like, okay, well now you have a couple more Piloted Shredders in your deck. That's not really, you know, a particularly relevant thing. But if you gang up Cold Light Oracle, it's like, okay, well now all of a sudden you have like, you know, gang ups and shadow steps and whatever to try and burn your opponent's deck out. And you know, whether that's enough to make a good deck, probably not. You know, you're probably still going to suffer against, you know, aggressive decks that are able to use the card draw effectively against you. But it is certainly interesting and has some cool combo potential. One thing that's worth noting is that you can actually, it looks like you can actually also gang up your opponent's creatures. So if your opponent has a guy that you really want to, you know, you really want a chance to play with that, it's like, okay, I'm going to gang up your guy. You know, it's the third Ragnaros that gets them. If I've learned anything from playing Priest and thought stealing and mind controlling, it is the third Ragnaros that gets them every time. All right, so next we have Majordomo. Oh god, this is such low quality. We're gonna get a new download for this. We need another new download for Majordomo. One moment. Let's try this one again. All right, Majordomo right here. So this card is hilarious. I don't think this card is good, but it is hilarious. So what the Death Rattle actually does is replace your hero with Ragnaros, which means that you have 8 max health, and you have a hero power of deal 8 to a random opponent. Like, that is, you know, going to be a dangerous effect to give your opponent the opportunity to trigger with Death Rattle. You know, like if you, particularly on a 9 mana card, because you can't do anything else when you play it, really. And very frequently it will be too soon that that Majordomo summons Ragnaros, because, you know, Domo will get like BGH and then you'll just get attacked and you'll die. I actually imagine that many games involving Majordomo may involve Majordomo dying and then your opponent playing a Ragnaros and ironically killing you as Ragnaros with Ragnaros the minion. But yes, I do think that the words of Ragnaros in Molten Core, you know, too soon have you awakened me, Executus, is going to be very, very key to most of the situations that this guy's involved in. But I think that the existence of this kind of card is awesome. I don't think it's going to see play in high level competitive decks. It's just not the kind of card that realistically is you know, offering enough for its cost and is controllable enough in order to actually give you you know, the ability to you know, use it in a way that is guaranteed to be effective for you. You know, it's one in the long line of big expensive minions that have cool powers. But I don't even think it isn't even like Big Game Hunter that makes Majordomo a you know, a dangerous card to play, because it's the fact that, you know, yeah, your opponent, if you play a 9-cost card that doesn't have an immediate impact on the board, and if your opponent does kill it, it can potentially increase their ability to kill you. Not really what you're looking for. But I do think this card is awesome. I think that it is the design space for Hearthstone that this illustrates is really interesting and really cool, and I'm glad it exists, even though I don't think it'll see play in competitive decks. All right, next we have, we already talked about Nefarian. We already talked about, here, we'll go to Resurrect. Resurrect, all right. Summon a random friendly minion that died this game. All right, this is a pretty cool card. It's a card that takes some doing to actually ensure that you're gonna get a good effect from it. And frankly, I think is a dangerous card in the sort of decks that I think priests usually want to play. But you know, if you're not playing a deck that's full of cards like Zombie Chow or Shadowboxer, or, you know, all these low-cost minions that you're using to fight your opponent's board, and you're playing sort of a more combo-oriented priest deck, this can be a really powerful effect. You know, 2 mana for, you know, the value of a minion that you have previously played can be really, really good. If, you know, having the ability to pay 2 mana to get something like a Dark Cultist or a Senjin or a Piloted Shredder or a Sludge Belcher, I think is a very powerful effect. It's different than you know, some of the cards that we've seen you know, priests have, like, you know, Mind Games or what are the other things? I guess it's Mind Vision, but that's a random card from their hand. But like, because this is controllable, because you have the ability to, you know, determine, okay, well, I'm only playing these minions in my deck, so at worst I can get this minion from Resurrect because it only affects friendly minions. unless your opponent somehow gives you a minion, like with Hungry Dragon or something, Resurrect will pretty much always give you something that is actually relatively high value. That said, I think that the best way, personally, I feel like the best way to play Priest, both right now and likely moving into Blackrock Mountain, will be a more sort of low to the ground, cheap minion centric type of deck. So I don't think that Resurrect is likely to see tons of play, just because I think that structurally Priest works best with cheap minions that it can use to contest the board, and then use its hero power to heal. That's really, you know, where Priest is getting the most value out of its hero power is when it has minions to play to heal with them. You know, otherwise it's just getting a bad version of Armor Up from Warrior. So, you know, I think that cards like Zombie Chow, and we're going to see Twilight Drake in a moment, or Twilight Whelp in a moment, those are the sort of cards that work really well in Priest decks, which makes Resurrect a little bit harder of a sell for me. But if you're playing a, you know, a somewhat higher curve, bigger Priest deck, I can definitely see Resurrect giving you the sort of tempo swings on particular turns, where you can, you know, you can have a big play of, you know, Resurrect plus other thing that allows you to sort of, you know, turn the corner when you've caught up. All right, next, right after this. All right, Revenge. So Revenge, I mean, I don't really play a ton of Warrior, but this card doesn't really look like the kind of card that I would want in most of my Warrior decks. In Control Warrior, you're typically, you know, working to keep your health up, and, you know, armor up and things like that. And, you know, this is basically just a worse Whirlwind. And in the more aggressive versions of Warrior that may want this effect because they want additional triggers on self-damage things, you'd also rather have Whirlwind, I imagine. It's possible that Revenge and Whirlwind will see play in the same decks, because you want redundancy on this kind of effect. Like if you're playing, say, a Dragon Egg, you know, Acolyte of Pain, Axe Thrower, Grim Patron deck, like I can certainly imagine wanting 2 copies of Whirlwind and 2 copies of Revenge to go along with your Death Bites, because, you know, that sort of AoE damage effect is something that's valuable to your fundamental proactive strategy. But other than that, like, this seems like, you know, in most situations would rather just have the mana discount for Whirlwind rather than have the, you know, additional minor upside of if you're able to trigger Revenge, do the additional damage. I mean, 3 isn't exactly a particularly impressive flashpoint either. If this were like 5 damage, it's like, okay, well now you're really exciting me, because that's enough to actually kill a lot of big minions. But when I have to be almost dead and you know, I'm killing piloted shredders but nothing bigger, I'm a little less excited. You know, most of the time 1 damage is going to be enough to kill a lot of what those things are going to be. Like I said, I think that this card has potential in the self-damage style of decks, in which case it's mostly redundancy for Whirlwind. But my inclination is that unless, you know, swarms of 2 and 3 health minions suddenly become popular, it's probably not going to see much play over Whirlwind in most decks that want it. Oops. Let's close this one. Add source media file. All right, next we have Solemn Vigil. This is horrible quality. Let me fix this. Remove. Download new version. I pulled these all off of Hearthstone. I have to give them credit for getting these screenshots that I'm using. And these snips or whatever. I have to imagine that they just actually have the direct files, because these are too perfect to actually just be snips from anything. So I'm jealous. All right, let's add this again. All right, Solemn Vigil. So this is a pretty interesting card. One of the things that a lot of aggressive Paladin decks tend to have issues with is card flow. We see, you know, Divine Favor as a possible way to refill your hand in a lot of these decks, but Divine Favor really suffers when you're actually also playing against other aggressive decks, because they typically don't have any cards in their hand. So the effect of Solemn Vigil is one that obviously is the same as Arcane Intellect, but in a class that doesn't necessarily have as easy access to that kind of effect. It's kind of like Arcane Intellect if you know, you've traded 1 minion, and if multiple minions have died, you have the possibility of getting, you know, a pretty big discount on this. And I mentioned before that this card is particularly exciting to me in combination with Chromemaggus, because it does have the ability to possibly be significantly reduced in cost. And if you like muster for battle, this compared to cards like Dragon's Breath is in a very different space, because Paladin is a class that has both a hero power that generates disposable minions, as well as muster for battle, which can allow you to be trading off and suiciding your minions to get the effect of Solemn Vigil or things like Volcanic Drake to have the cost reduction without really paying a big resource cost. So I think that this is a card that actually has a pretty significant amount of potential in sort of a mid-range or potentially Chromemaggus dragon style of Paladin deck. Right now, the only Paladin card draw you have is, again, like things like Acolyte of Pain, which is situational based on what your opponent actually has. Lay on Hands, which is really expensive, and obviously it's a big burst of card draw, but being able to reload earlier in the game when you're suiciding your Silver Hand recruits or things like that. I think that a deck with like Volcanic Drake and Solemn Vigil, potentially Chromemaggus, has a reasonable amount of potential as something at least worth exploring. It's not to say that this is like a world-changing card, but I think that it is a potentially good, strong utility card for the right deck, and definitely fits. This mechanic definitely fits better in Paladin than in any other class because of muster for battle and your hero power. Let's check next. All right, Twilight Whelp. This guy is adorable and I think great. So those of you who have paid attention to my sort of historical deck building in Hearthstone may have seen that I have built Dragon Priest decks before it was cool. I was playing board control into Ysera style decks even back when the Unleash Hunter decks were popular, and Twilight Whelp is kind of like a Zombie Chow without the drawback. And some people might say that, well, in Priest, Zombie Chow doesn't necessarily have a drawback because you have Akanai Soul Priest, and a lot of Priest decks I actually think don't want to play with Akanai Soul Priest because they are more sort of healing and board focused than want to have the sort of burst damage or anything like that. And some decks may actually want 4 copies of a 2/3 for 1. You can have a deck that has both Twilight Whelp and Zombie Chow in it if you really want to be able to contest the board early. And with Twilight Whelp, yes, if you miss the trigger, if you're not holding a dragon, it's actually a pretty high cost. Being a 2/1 versus a 2/3 is a huge difference, and that's one of the big things about Twilight Whelp. Compare it to, say, Zombie Chow. Compared to Zombie Chow, like how much of a difference is the not having the downside on Zombie Chow? That your opponent regains the life, and unless you're playing a very aggressive deck, I think that in many cases being guaranteed the trigger for guaranteed the extra 2 health on your Zombie Chow is likely to be worth it rather than playing Twilight Whelp. Simply because, especially if you're the first player, if you're player 1 and you only have a 3-card hand, let's say your hand is Twilight Whelp and 2 expensive dragons. It's like, do you keep that hand? Do you mulligan one of the dragons and keep the other one? Like you really generally want to mulligan into a hand that has an effective curve, and Twilight Whelp is going to make it pretty difficult to ensure that you can both have the Twilight Whelp on time and that you're able to actually have your your curve after that if you're holding an expensive dragon in order to ensure that you're able to enable it. This is a sort of card that makes it a lot better to have the coin because you have an additional card in your opening hand. Which is an additional card that's able to potentially be a dragon to enable the Twilight Whelp battle cry in the first turn. So this is a card that I was initially pretty excited about because I was like, oh wow, you can play a 2/3 on turn 1 and not have to worry about the Zombie Chow drawback. But the more I thought about it, the more that this card seemed like it's pretty troubled compared to Zombie Chow because I think I would much rather have the guaranteed 2 health on turn 1 rather than the elimination of the Zombie Chow drawback, particularly in a deck that is not all that likely to care about the additional health all that much because you're playing the long game. So this is a card that I very much have a question mark about because it seems like it's potentially quite powerful. If you do want 4 of this effect, I say 8 because in Magic you have 4 of a card. But anytime I think about having you can have redundancy in this, you can have 8 of them. It's like, no, I actually mean 4 when I'm talking about Hearthstone. So yeah, the if you're holding a dragon effects get a little bit dicey, particularly on the early game ones, and especially when you are the primary player, when you don't have the 4 cards with the coin. So yeah, I think this is a card that has potential, but is going to need to play around with a bit in order to see if it's worth justifying over Zombie Chow. And I think we may have one more card. Yeah, we have one more card. And it's a card that makes me so sad. This is a card that seems like it's going to be pretty cool. You know, it's a 7/8 taunt that can be, you know, massively discounted. Druid isn't a class that this mechanic is particularly impressive in. You know, we saw this with Volcanic Drake. We saw this with what is it, Solemn Vigil and Dragon's Breath. I think that, as I said during the review of Solemn Vigil, I think that that's the place where it's probably the strongest, because Paladin's a class that can easily throw away minions and generate additional minions to get that cost reduction trigger. But in Constructed, Volcanic Lumberer would be so much better if it were just a 6/8 because of Big Game Hunter. And you know, I feel like this is something I say all the time, but I feel like this is a card that could be cool if Big Game Hunter didn't exist. And there's lots of those. And you know, I feel like you know, there's probably a lot of people who are like, oh well, Big Game Hunter is really important for, you know, this, and this, and I agree that the current metagame and the development of the cards are all balanced around the fact that Big Game Hunter does exist. But it makes me sad that there are so many cards like this that are unlikely to ever really see play because Big Game Hunter exists and they're not worth trying to enable. Building your deck in such a way that you can, you know, trade off like early guys to get a discount, Volcanic Lumberer, or like set up poison seeds into a Volcanic Lumberer or whatever else, it's just not worth it because your opponent can just kill it with Big Game Hunter, and that sucks. So it seems like the perfect way to end my little review online here is that oh, I didn't go over Quick Shot, did I? I just saw someone in the chat mention that. I haven't talked about that yet. How did I miss that? I was going through. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, well, here we go. Quick Shot. Oh, I do have it. I just skipped over it somehow, alphabetically. All right, well, anyway, sorry, Volcanic Lumberer. Big Game Hunter, you're in his sights. Quick Shot. Where are you? There you are. Okay. Quick Shot. So, 2 cost, Hunter Spell. Deal 3 damage if your hand is empty, draw a card. This card is clearly pretty strong. I've seen some people commenting that they think this card is too good and that this card, you know, leads to Hunter being too powerful or something like that. But realistically, I don't know exactly where this card's role is. I think it's definitely the card that can be potentially pretty strong in Face Hunter decks. But if you look at the way that Face Hunter decks actually play, they're rarely actually empty-handed. Yes, like 3 damage for 2 mana is like, you know, totally fine. It's particularly strong in Hunter because you care about just damaging the face. But if you look at Face Hunter decks, they frequently include cards like Arcane Golem or Ironbeak Owl or Leroy, and all these sort of things that you can't just easily empty your hand and, you know, there be no implications to that. So most of the time I think we're looking at Quick Shot as just 2 mana, deal 3 damage. And is that a card that Face Hunter wants? Maybe. And certainly in some situations you'll be able to, you know, Quick Shot into another spell late in the game when your hand is empty. But in my experience, and I've actually been playing a lot of Face Hunter, because I actually think the deck's quite strong, and as to whether it's okay that a deck like Face Hunter is strong, you know, if it's good for the game, etc., that's another question entirely in my mind. But I don't think this is actually a card that seems like it's outrageously powerful in Face Hunter, because there's already a lot of cards that have similar kinds of effects. I definitely think that it's likely to see play in Face Hunter. You might play it over something like Wolf Rider because it can bypass taunts, you know, it's direct damage, but at the same time, you know, the fact that your opponent has to then deal with those minions, those charge minions, is a pretty big deal. So I do think this card is definitely strong. I think it'll very likely see play in Face Hunter, you know, potentially as a replacement for some of those charge minions or something like that in the late game, just because it is, you know, damage that can go through taunts guaranteed. But I don't think this is the sort of card that's going to be outrageously powerful, because your hand is rarely empty as a Face Hunter because you do have those situational cards you're holding on to, in order to actually be able to break through your opponent's taunt and win the game. So I think this is a strong card. I don't think this is a game-breaking card, and I don't think it's going to, you know, sort of massively upset the balance of the world such that Face Hunter is the best deck ever, as some people seem to think. So, yep, there we go. So yeah, I think that is all the cards that were revealed today. So overall, you know, I think that there's a lot of cool stuff in Blackrock Mountain. I'm definitely excited to see how things play out. I'm also pretty excited to see just how the sort of metagame develops from week to week. One of the cool things that's going to happen with the adventure as opposed to a normal set is the fact that there's individual cards that are just released. Well, not individual cards, individual groups of cards, small groups of cards that are released week by week as the different wings unlock. Unfortunately, I'm actually not going to be able to experience that the first couple of weeks. I actually leave on Wednesday for a Magic tournament in Belgium, and I won't be back for like a week and a half. So I'm going to have to be, you know, watching from the sidelines as people are able to sort of explore using the first couple of weeks worth of wings of cards. But when I get back, I'm particularly excited for the implications that the new cards will have for the Kingdom Pro League on a week by week basis, because, you know, each week in that event, you know, every player brings new decks, or at least has the opportunity to bring new decks, and seeing how that metagame will shift every week as new cards are added to the card pool, I think will be really, really cool. So anyway, I'm gonna see if I can actually take some questions from the chat if it's not too spammy right now, but we'll see if there's anything that people want to, you know, have particular questions about. Am I going to be in Belgium? Yes, I'm going to be in Belgium from the 2nd to the 13th. I will be playing in the Magic Pro Tour the weekend of the 12th, the 10th through 12th or something. I may or may not have time to grab a beer. With the new legendaries introduced, what's my opinion on Red Blackhand? I already thought Rend was good. I think that people massively undervalued Rend when he was first revealed because they see a big expensive minion that dies to Big Game Hunter, but aren't really looking at the fact that it also kills a minion when it comes into play. So yes, your opponent can trade with it. Yes, your opponent can BGH it. It's not like a great body for its cost, but it's also immediately killing a potentially large minion on your opponent's side, and that's a really powerful effect. So I do think that Rend is going to be a powerful card in the decks that can support it. What deck am I playing in Belgium? I can't say that. I haven't actually even really started testing, so. Twilight Drake or Hungry Dragon? I think that's an interesting question. I think that Hungry Dragon seems to me to be the one that is more likely to be attractive in more decks, if only because, you know, it's guaranteed to be a large body. The attack can break through a Sludge Belcher. Yes, you give your opponent a small minion, but I imagine lots of dragon decks are going to be using cards like Blackwing Technician, which will give you the ability to have like a strong early board presence that can help deal with the cheap minions that your opponent gets off of